Hi, everybody, and welcome to another MIRIS webinar, focusing mostly on AN-ACC, but certainly now that AN-ACC's kicked off, starting to broaden out our thinking to the broader reform agenda. But this webinar is going to focus on the first 40 days and 40 nights of AN-ACC. So AN-ACC did kick off on the 1st of October. And so in this session, we're going to focus on what's happened in the first 40 days and how are we going so far. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Where we are today, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. But I'd also like to acknowledge the elders past and present across Australia, wherever you may be today. I'd extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this call. So thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us again. Obviously, this webinar series, I think this is number 10 that we've done now. We are just trying to provide information to the industry as the best that we can on some of the relevant issues affecting us, and so we provide these free webinars just to shine some light on some of the challenges. And one of the things we like to do in that process is bring you an esteemed provider panel. So we've got a bunch of providers here today with me that we're going to talk to. I'll introduce them a little bit later, but so let's get straight into it. Obviously, 40 days, 40 nights of AN-ACC. What's happened? There's been a lot going on. We've got some feedback. We've got some analysis and data and insights on the industry that our data insights guru Tyler's going to take us through. Then we're going to talk about some key observations and then a little bit of a focus on what's happening over the next 12 months, because there's a lot of change happening. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So let's get into it, and I'll hand over to Tyler.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. All I'm going to do is take a few minutes to go through some very high-level measures and ones that we're actually quite familiar with historically. But we have sort of a new way of looking at them with regard to the new structure of AN-ACC. And two, really, these sort of industry benchmarks are even more important now than ever. I think everyone has been in the dark. It's such early days in terms of industry-wide data. We don't have any sort of AN-ACC reports coming out of the AIHW or Services Australia or anything. So I think it's important just to look at the claims as we see them for the month of October. And so the first measure, again, one that we're really familiar with historically with ACFI, is average daily subsidy. And the paid claims coming out of Services Australia as of the last day of October averaged at $221 per resident per day. And I think the first interesting takeaway there is that we're a little bit shy of what the department told us they expected to see as an average. So last April, when they announced the first NWOW at $216.80, they projected an average daily subsidy of $225. So $221 being $4 shy of that is not insignificant, but it's a number that we also have to break down into those different cohorts, where historically, when MIRIS calculated average daily subsidy, we always excluded respite because it was, I guess, a number that we felt could be more variable and skew that what we used as a lead indicator for revenue. But now, as respite residents, along with permanent residents, all carry a care minute requirement, I think we really have to revisit how we use average daily subsidy as it pertains to that connection to care minutes. And so that being said, that 221 average, and I'll show you how that sort of breaks down across different cohorts, but the fact that it's shy of that 225 expected number It also means that our case mix across the industry is shy of the 200-minute average. So when they announced the NWOW, they also put forward a slightly different weighting for the RVUs. So the relative value units that are used against every classification to form the care minute requirement for that classification were all adjusted in a way to make that 225 average align exactly to a 200-minute average. And so again, as we're all getting used to, those two metrics or two measures being inextricably linked means that, yeah, so the industry isn't actually required to provide 200 minutes. At the moment, it's 196. And I'll look at that a little bit more on the next slide. But before we jump there, I'll just point out that difference that exists now when we look at folding in respite residents to that average. So using an all residents measure of average subsidy compared to just permanent residents. And so at a industry level, we're looking at about a little more than $1 in difference, and facility by facility, this really all depends on the proportion of occupied bed days that are used by respite. As an industry, it's typically on any given month between 3 and 4% of occupied bed days are devoted to respite residents. And so you can see there on the bottom left, our permanent residents are attracting that 221. If we include all residents, it's just below 220, so a little over $1 difference. So the more respite at any given facility, typically the more you would shave off of the permanent resident number. And of course, this depends on the classification of that respite, where we do know that the high respite 103 is going to be a very rare outcome for any given respite stay. But then just moving over to the right there, we can see the breakdown by facility type. So there is some significant variability there. We're 95% of the industry is really wanting to focus on that all other RAC-Fs where their facilities are located. There is quite a significant cohort of facilities that do operate as one that qualifies for the criteria of homeless. And you can see the average for those facilities is just short of $300 per resident per day. And then as we move up that scale, those services that are in the modified Monash of 6 or 7, this is a much smaller proportion of the industry, particularly those that operate in a modified Monash 7, the most remote location, and servicing an indigenous population. So admittedly, a very small group of beds when compared to the industry. But when you see that average of over $513 per resident per day, that is a significantly big outlier to skew the average. And so you can see when we drill down to that all other RAC-Fs, we're looking at that 219 number. Sorry if you can't make that out on the screen. It's 219.73 for permanent residents. But again, when we incorporate all residents, all occupied bed days, the average is below 219. So again, when we look at a number that was potentially one that we saw as a early indicator, that 225, and now the industry is getting a number sub 219, that is quite a significant gap. And so I think, again, this all means the knock-on effect is a lower case mix. And if we just jump to the next slide now, we can sort of break down what that looks like. And I guess first, the reason why we have a lower subsidy average is our distribution of residents across AN-ACC classes is lower than what was expected. And I think one of the strong hypotheses for the occurrence of that, and one that we can really evidence through quite a significant round of reclassifications is that when shadow assessments started over 2 years ago, as the natural resident movements occurred over those subsequent 2 years, any shadow assessed AN-ACC that was on the high end, those residents were more likely to be the ones that departed, while the shadow assessed residents on the low end were more likely to stay in situ during the period up until now, where they've converted into a paid claim. And so ultimately what that means is the resident population that is in that paid claim category now for October potentially needs to be reassessed. And we do have quite a bit of evidence across the industry that proactive reassessment of those historical shadow assessed classifications are largely resulting in a higher AN-ACC classification for those residents. And so I think in terms of how businesses need to operate over the next year is the first job that we have is getting an accurate classification against every resident in our care, because once that resident population has an accurate AN-ACC lens across it, then we can go about the business of understanding how we resource for that resident population. So being able to incorporate things like our pre-admission and waitlist data to understand how we can replace empty beds and the impact that they have with their projected AN-ACC classifications to the case mix for that cohort. And then within the in situ resident population, identifying the reclassifications that can occur to keep their classifications accurate to their care need. And all of that, again, happening in combination with how we balance towards a resourcing or demand template. And just to sort of round off what we're seeing in the industry's paid claims currently, you can see that class 5 is the most common outcome, and that was something that was certainly projected from the beginning. So class 5 and 7 being the two most common outcomes, and a huge majority of all residents falling somewhere within that assisted mobility space was something that we certainly all expected based on shadow assessments and what is coming true now in those paid claims. But I think what we may find is that 20%, so 1 in 5 residents being in a class 5 may actually filter further up the scale, where again, I think based on what the department was expecting, the claims today are a little bit skewed towards the low end. And so you can see in the table below on the left, that case mix is about 4 minutes short of the projected 200-minute average. And so also a little less than a full minute below the RN projection of 40 minutes. And what we can do with those minutes across the multiplier, which is the number of residents, is roll that up to see how many hours are required on a daily basis or fortnightly basis, and then convert that into shifts. And that's really where you can get really granular with how you align a resident cohort to a demand template. And that really speaks to that new main KPI that I think facilities will focus on now, rather than looking at ADS and occupancy as real performance measures. It'll be the operating results, and a number that the department has been quoting for several weeks now is 75%, which is the outcome of saying every 75 cents of every subsidy dollar is spent on the provision of care in that direct care rostered costs. And what's I guess sort of interesting to note here is that you can see in the very bottom left, I've input some cost assumptions, and that RN hourly wage of $46 includes the 15% that we learned will be added to the minimum wage from the Fair Work case that was resulted last week. And so previously that government expenditure on AN-ACC, when we compared it to the care minute requirement, we had an optimal operating result closer to 72%. But now when we add in that extra 15% of expenditure, we get almost exactly a 75% operating result. So the fact that the department was quoting 75% for several weeks, I think is interesting, that perhaps they had a little insight on what the outcome of that Fair Work case was going to be. But I suppose that shouldn't be too surprising. But ultimately, yeah, we are sort of aligning very closely to what was expected. And so that's all I had prepared for this one. I'll throw it back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Ty. Thanks. Yeah, it's now that you've put all your QFR data in last Friday, really should be quite easy to look at what you've quoted for care minutes as a percentage of the total funding and see where you fall in that 70-75% range. And certainly the department was quoting that some providers are down at 65%. So you probably don't want to find yourself down at 65, or you might get a knock on the door. Let's chat to our panel now. So very, very pleased to have a great group of providers with us today. Erin from Anglican Care up in near Newcastle, and Justin's up that way too from Alino Living, and Matt from South Australia, Barossa Village. Welcome, Matt, and Matthew Hartley from Salvation Army. So thanks everyone for being here. And really what I just wanted to, before I get into talking about the observation we've got from, working with so many providers across the country, just to get your thoughts on the first 40 days and how you've been going and what's been happening for you. Let's start with you, Erin. Ladies first.
Thanks so much. Look, I guess like many of us, the first 40 days when we rolled over into October 1st, it was a little bit anticlimactic is probably one way you could describe it. It was just another Monday or another. It was actually a long weekend on that weekend, wasn't it? Mm. So there wasn't really any material change from what we had been doing in our preparation to leading up towards preparing for AN-ACC, and then after it actually clicked over. We had really been sort of preparing ourselves with our validations and things of the shadow assessment data. So that has really just continued for us. We were reviewing our Services Australia system. We were still a little bit uncertain about some of the information that was coming through, like us all, but really we've just continued on with how we'd already been progressing, and there wasn't really much of a change from our preparation beforehand to afterwards, I would say.
Yeah, I think that was true. It's 1st of October just came and went. I think one of the things that really struck me though was it's all the theory's gone. Now we're in it. Now this is about how we get paid right now. So, there's some more focus on it right now, because this is about actually how payments come through, don't they? Justin, what happened with you? You've been overseas, a little bit of jet lag more than anything.
Yeah, look, I think sort of following on from what Erin said is that there was that bit of a lead up to get to the 1st of October. It was almost hurry up and wait, because it was situation normal, and we slowly move forward. I think I guess the challenge for us has been around continuing to monitor those reassessments. We're doing that for a while now, so continuing to do that. But I guess my concern around this whole process is that, unfortunately, I've been aged care or fortunately for a long time. So I've seen PCAI, Cameron Sam, RCS, ACFI, and now AN-ACC. And every time, after about 6 or 12 months, something comes out from the department that says, oh, there was unintended consequences. And so we're trying to guess what those unintended consequences will be.
Mm.
But because we're still waiting for a lot of data, it's still a lot of things are up in the air at the moment. So we're really just waiting to see what that data looks like, continue to review the residents, and yeah, go from there.
Thanks, mate. Matt? Sorry.
Yeah,
Matt.
well, it certainly was interesting because we were still waiting for all our payments to come through from ACFI. So going to a not-for-profit board and telling them that, well, we haven't been paid from the last system, but we've got a new system coming in, and trust us, we know what we're doing, really was a fun time. Yeah, look, we tried to make friends with the assessors as much as possible. We made it as easy as for them to get in and, really milked them for information as much as we could. I guess the disturbing part for me was a lot of them didn't really understand anything past the assessments. So they were very much working in isolation, and I could see the frustration in them to have those sorts of questions about even some of the assessments and not really understand how it linked through right up until after the 1st of October. So yeah, it was as Erin said, it was anticlimactic, and as Justin says, we've been through this rodeo several times before. And yes, I guess the reality of our enrolled nursing workforce also was a bit of a hard-hitting one for us. And as an inter-regional provider, workforce is always a bit of a challenge, as it is with everyone else. And finding we've always used enrolled nurses quite extensively, so having them not included in skilled minutes, so to speak, was a bit of a, we need to rethink our business model. So yes, first 40 days, as much as it didn't achieve anything on the day, it certainly made life interesting.
Mm. And Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Look, what's been sort of exercising, I suppose, my mind and the team over here is, to your point, there was no big bang. And so, we've just been continuing to work to our sort of change program, almost as if it was like, oh yeah, it's kind of started now. But, there's still a lot of work to do, I think, in terms of, bedding our systems down, bedding our processes down. A good example of which is, we all know we're now the validators, right? So, looking at, we're really focused on looking at what's the quality of the assessments coming in, and how do we check them, sort of looking at the consistency. Having a national footprint sort of allows us to compare, what those new resident admissions are. And we've still got a very big backlog of reassessment. So it was pleasing to hear a few months ago that the department didn't put a hard date on having those reassessments done. I think also we're continuing to look at opportunities to innovate. So, decoupling sort of pain management from the funding instruments allowed us to do that. So I think that's been a positive. Tracking care minutes and understanding the implications on our rosters. And, Matt mentioned the challenges of regional services. We've got a few regionals. So, I think assessing the step up, and I know we've got some time to transition, but that time will come around very quickly. And certainly I'll talk a little bit more later in the session around the supply side concerns that I have. And just getting used to sort of flexing rosters and changing rosters now for not only occupancy, but also change in acuity. We're investing in systems and processes that will help our people do that. So those programs are ongoing. And, I think that the divorcing sort of revenue and the care minute targets in the first sort of 12 months will certainly help us, but help other providers to be able to reinvest back into their business to get sort of future state ready for this in terms of bedding down AN-ACC. So that's kind of been the focus over here, Andrew.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. And just for everyone listening, we're not able to answer questions and putting your hand up, etc. But please use the Q&A, because we certainly look at those questions. There are people in the chat who are answering questions for you, and we will come to some of those questions at the end of the session and see if we can answer a few of them. So thanks for everybody who's putting stuff in the Q&A. So now I just want to run through a bunch of stuff, just some of our observations and some thoughts, and then we're going to come back to the panel and have a little bit of a talk about what's next. But just a reminder that certainly these are the 7 priorities that we've got people focusing on in the transition work that we're doing. Over 60 providers we're working with at the moment, so a big cohort, over 30,000 beds. And these are really the big ones if you should be focusing on. We've talked about these before, but just to go over them quickly, classification accuracy, becoming your own assessor really starts with getting your classifications accurate. The care minute policy and how you're going to transition to compliance over the next 12 months is going to be really important, especially when care minutes are going to be included in the star ratings that we're just about to get. So those 2 things together are really the number 1 and number 2 are really the essence of AN-ACC, and being on top of those is really what transitioning to AN-ACC is all about. Number 3, there is some changes to roles. The new AN-ACC coordinators from the ACFI coordinators, and there is some more analytical capabilities that are required because of that connection between funding and care minutes. So that's a focus. 4B transition that Matt mentioned, is a big focus for the industry and a really great opportunity to innovate, as he mentioned. Changing clinical governance for AN-ACC, number 5, is a really big question that's being tackled at the moment, and really is how you adjust your clinical system that really is supposed to be focused on now on care and care planning, not funding, but it certainly has to support that external assessment process in terms of the information it provides. But also we're going to be doing this on the backdrop of changing standards. So there's a really interesting time for how we collect governance information at the moment. Number 6, how you get that care minute reporting out of your rosters. We're just about to go into the next lot of QFR reporting. The thing with quarterly reporting, different from annual reporting, it's coming around so fast. So if you don't have a slick process for, once you've got number 2, your care minute policy, and you've worked out what you're going to report, making sure you can get good access to that information and produce something consistently. And that really should come from your rosters. So a lot of people right now are talking to us about that because of, a roster platform that used to do the job, time and attendance, fairly simplistic, is not going to keep doing the job going forward. And then number 7, managing those AN-ACC transactions and data. It's a new space. There is a system required. Anyone who's been managing AN-ACC reassessments and things like that in a spreadsheet knows what I'm talking about. That's not the way to do it going forward. And certainly the ability to hold data and manage data and build scenarios around the classifications and the care minute implications is going to be a huge advantage. So they're the 7. If you want to focus on things, that's what we recommend you focus on. But so what are the key observations? What have people been telling us? We have these 60 providers, at least. We talk to a number of other clients, dozens of other clients, but we have these 60 providers who are all going through the transition together. So we speak to them at least fortnightly. So, 60 conversations every 2 weeks only about this. And so here are some of the key themes that are coming out in the last 40 days to add to what our panel just talked about. So definitely the payment statements. There were delays in August and September and now October, and inconsistencies. There's some inconsistency in the data. And I think as Matt pointed out, it's hard to start convincing your board that everything's under control. And then their next question is, so what do the finances look like? And, the answer is, well, we're not 100% sure yet. So, there's a lot of uncertainty around there. And like I said, after the 1st of October, this became super real because this is how we get paid. So, payment statements, of course, will get better and better, but we're also in a hybrid world at the moment. So a bit of ACFI, a bit of AN-ACC. It's a messy place to be. Reclassifications, a lot of people are not getting the results they expect. So that's going to come straight back to your ability to actually predict AN-ACC reclassification and what it should be, and really understanding the model and really understanding how the clinical assessments are applied in a mathematical way to get the outcome for AN-ACC. So really understanding that as a learning curve for everybody. But also the other thing contributing to that is the quality of the information in your system. It's a structural impediment that the assessors come in and look at a resident for a period of time, and then they rely on your system to fill in the gaps. And certainly for behaviours and the average view of the care of a resident over a 7-day period might look very different to that small window they look at. And like somebody said to me this week, you're really reclassifying, you're really documenting for the maximum of their care, the worst of their care, not the average or the ideal. So the gaps in the information are really will be starting to show now as you don't get the results you're looking for. And just a point there is no fee. So people are concerned about reclassifying. As one of Matt's pointed out earlier, they've lifted those rules. You can basically reclassify anytime care needs changed. As the department themselves said, when what you do increases and what they can do decreases, that is a trigger to be looking at a different classification. So and there is no fees associated with that at this stage. As long as everybody doesn't abuse it, that's not the department's intention. So 4B pain management, there's a lot of people who haven't started reviewing that, and certainly takes a huge amount of time. So it's probably not transitioning as fast as everybody would like, but those who have got on that journey are having fantastic results. So I encourage everybody to get on with that. Clinical documentation, that's mentioned earlier, care needs versus capability, the new quality standards. There's a lot of work to do on changing information. A lot of people are starting, including the clinical vendors themselves, are probably starting to wonder how much change they want to be going through in the next few months, when they're probably going to be needing to change the system fairly significantly when the new standards come out in the next 12 months. So, clinical documentation is a big focus for everybody at the moment. The QFR, a lot of people saying to us, we got it in, but did we get it right? Certainly the people we're working with have been having this conversation for many, many months, but we also know of lots of other people who have put in their report and are still scratching their head. And that really is not just whether you can get access to good information, but if you can actually have decided how you want to interpret the current rules and get the care minutes right, especially around some of those multifunction roles where care minutes might be trapped in other roles, and the very, very valuable RN minutes in the management roles. So how much of those management roles can you count? How much of that care admin can you count? So they seem to be the two big questions in the care minutes right now. Closing out of ACFI. So, we're just expected to shut the door on ACFI, but what does that actually look like? So we're doing quite a bit of work with people at the moment on making sure we close out ACFI properly over the next few weeks as ACFI becomes no longer relevant. And for certain things like the eventual reconciliation, did you get ACFI, all the ACFI you're entitled to? Did all of that get reconciled properly? That's probably something that's going to be going on for months. And definitely archiving your ACFI packs. So they are archivable for 7 years. So getting your ACFI packs sorted and put away is also something to remember. And then the external assessments, we are getting some reports back now. The volume of external assessments is ramping up, and the voluntary ones, and we're getting a bit of variability being reported at organisation levels. So different assessors, different approaches, different levels of organisation, and when they turn up, and different levels of efficiency. So certainly across the country, that there's starting to be some variability in that. So if you're experiencing that, you're not alone. So hopefully that validates some of the things that you're feeling right now in the first 40 days. The next thing I wanted to do quickly, though, is just also look forward. So there's an extraordinary amount of change that is now slated for the next 12 months, more than I can ever recall. So we've always been talking about things that were changing, but this is all absolutely planned in the next 12 months activity, and it's quite extraordinary considering the big change we've just been through on the 1st of October. It's going to be followed up rapidly with a number of waves of other change, mostly all related to each other, but just more and more stuff to do. So obviously the star ratings are going to kick in by the end of this year. You would have seen the notifications around the changes in the code of conduct and the governance requirements. They kick in on the 1st of December. So that's just more happening in the background. Then your next QFR is going to be due on the 15th of Feb. So that quarterly reporting process and any changes or thoughts that you have about the way that care minutes play out over the next few months are going to be reportable in the 15th of Feb. We've got Christmas in between that and the holidays. We're going to go straight into new QIs. So 1st of April is when they kick in, they're reportable. That's the first quarter that they're going to be recordable. So 1st of April, you're going to be recording on the new QIs for reporting at the end of that next quarter. 24/7 RN is going to be mandatory on the 1st of July. This is next year. This is an interesting one for me because most of the people we're speaking to are almost polarized on this. A lot of people are like, yep, no problem, we do that anyway. And a lot of people are, we don't even have any idea how we're going to make that work. So, you know, especially the smaller facilities, more regional facilities, the RN on site every day, but not necessarily around the clock 7 days a week. So 24/7 RN's mandatory on the 1st of July. Then the mandatory care minutes kick in October, so a year from now, and everybody's going to need to be ramping towards that. You're all going to have some reaction to the star ratings, and that's going to factor into that and be reportable and disclosed as we understand it as part of the star rating, your target and your care minutes. So it'll be interesting to see how much more quickly people want to become compliant to those care minutes over the next 3 to 6 months if that causes a bit of a buzz. But otherwise, care minutes aren't mandatory until October 2023. We've got new legislation, the New Aged Care Act. It's supposed to be coming next year. I don't know if there's any specific timing there, but certainly there'll be some consultation going on. And another thing that's been slated for consultation is the accommodation review. And we see that as a fairly significant change for the industry because we can see how taxpayers' money and the provision of care funding is the margin is starting to become controlled. You've got, you know, control of funding and assessments and control of costs through care minutes. So controlled margin, and that's seems to be a very intentional policy. But if you're really fixing that margin on the care funding side, you know, the idea that you would deregulate or open up the accommodation side and the daily living side to really look at ways that organisations could be more competitive with their offerings, whatever they are. You know, we could see that being quite a big change, additional services and as generally just opening up the market for market forces around what you can charge for that sort of thing seems to be a logical next step. But it'll be really interesting to see once you remove RADs and DAPs and deregulate that sort of side of it, where they go with that and what they think. And so consultation will be a big part of that process. And we look forward to working with everybody on that. So lots of change, and this is just the next 12 months. So it's probably the next 9 months for the most part. So lots happening on the background of getting the hang of AN-ACC. So let's go back to the panel. So where are we going from here? We've got quite a bit to do over the next few months, and AN-ACC's going to have to settle down, and we've got people focusing on, you know, just getting used to the new world. And as you said, Justin, it's just a same old in some ways, and but it's just another thing to get used to. But let's go backwards now. Let's hear from you first, Matthew. What's looking forward look like for you?
Yeah, you made a couple of good points there, Andrew, around, you know, what I'm calling the just-in-time regulatory reform approach that, you know, post the Royal Commission. Yeah, that's kind of the new gravity that we're all going to have to get used to. And certainly once you start looking at sort of the 5 pillars over 5 years, you know, there's not one part of any aged care provider that's not going to be tied up in, you know, having to adapt and change around that. And I think, you know, it's certainly a welcome change on the historical approaches where the industry did get sort of bogged down prior to, you know, the Royal Commission. But there is the risk of fatigue, and also, Justin's point earlier, the risk of unintended consequences. So I think there's more to see, you know, on the point that Tyler made around the changes to the cost weightings relative to the funding that you receive across, you know, the permanent classification. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out and whether it creates any winners and losers from residents coming into aged care. I think providers will have to position themselves to get used to more transparency in the industry and relative performance. So it's kind of like lifting the lid on aged care. How do I now compare to other providers? For us, that means, you know, we're pushing very sort of earnestly into data and looking at the data sources. How do we capture that in a cost-effective way, and really trying to drive, I suppose, more decision-making based on that data, because it's the new reality. Workforce. Lots of challenges there. Supply side challenges. You know, how do we achieve the uplift? You know, those sorts of things, particularly important. And I think the star rating. You know, we've got the star ratings coming out within a month. We still don't have the algorithms. You know, that's kind of the extreme end of this sort of just-in-time reforms. But you know, it'll be good to get the algorithms where we're sort of coming up with some quasi calculations ourselves, or assessments, if you like. But you know, certainly, I think getting our head around those algorithms when they're released and seeing. And assessing how we're comparing to, you know, our peers, you know, is an important sort of step as we sort of go forward on the regulatory changes. So, like you said, Andrew, much more focus outside of AN-ACC to come, and you know, some of those key themes around transparency, you know, sort of data, and just getting used to the tempo of this, right? How do we do that in a more business as usual way rather than the heroics of project to project? It needs to become more sustainable across the industry, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of the idea that once we get used to it, it'll actually be better. It'll be more predictable, but it's just that getting used to it that we have to do first. And I like your comments about data. Yeah, we've never been in a world where data is so important, and visibility, transparency is the key to control.
Absolutely. So, and to be kind of the march of your own destiny there, you need to be looking at it. You need to have access to it. You need to know your KPIs. You know, I suppose it's a big shift, but it's the natural progression now. That's the world that the department's living in, and that's the world that we all have to kind of get used to, I suppose.
It's interesting, isn't it, that there's now that you make me think about it, there's so many interplays there. So the department are asking for more information. You're needing more information.
Yeah.
They're gathering more information through the assessments processes, which you then don't have. So you've got to start recreating that. There's it's a big data push and pull, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Let's go on to other Matt, South Australian Matt Cold. What about you? What's looking forward look like for you?
Yeah, very similar. Data is going to be king pretty much for the next period of time, but also picking up on that opportunity to innovate. There are some ways that we can think about the work that we're doing very differently, not being bound to the 4B model, which is probably the best thing that's come out of this, in my opinion. Working out what to do with our allied health staff, that making them actually more valuable, using their skills in a way that is going to give a better well-being output to our clients and support our brand so much better than just having a massage once or 3 times a week. You know, as good as that was, it didn't tick the boxes for a lot of people. So trying to be optimistic, you're sort of trying to find the opportunities here, but you've just got to be on top of your business systems now more than ever before, because yes, we are the validators. So looking at that shadow data again was the first thing we did in the lead up, and we probably had a dozen residents reappraised before we actually even got to day one. So and then working the systems out around that. We've still got a whole heap of ACFI based resources that we budgeted for. Now, it's nice doing a a change in funding tool off budget cycle, because then you've got a bit of flexibility with everyone that's looking at your budgets to make it up as you go along. I hope my board's not listening to me when I'm saying that, but it certainly has given us some different ways of looking at things, and we've always liked to innovate. So we'll take it as an opportunity to innovate in that space and look forward to new metrics to give us some of that data as well. And look at, we do use a suite of Mirrors products. So, Works and things like that are really very useful in giving our ground staff a view, or will be useful at giving them a view of what care is actually costing and where we're actually sitting on a day-to-day basis, so we can make better decisions.
Yeah, true that. And you just reminded me actually of a comment I've heard a couple of times. A lot of people didn't budget for the one-off payment. So that's a new thing. So getting that one-off payment, that $1,144, when so you look at how many new residents come into the organisation recurringly. A lot of people don't have that in their budget as a revenue stream, and it can become significant. So a little bonus there to look out for if you haven't already. Justin, what's going on for you, Nick? What are you looking forward to?
A lot of my stuff follows on from what both Matts have said, is that data is key to moving forward. Really understanding where our residents are at, looking at every bit of data we can get. We're looking at our rostering platforms, those sort of things. Like everybody, workforce staffing numbers is critical, and probably looking at different ways around that. Different models that we can sort of come up with to manage the shortfall that we've all got. I think the other thing around the star ratings for me is that I'll be really curious to see how that's sold to the rest of the to the non-aged care industry, to our consumers. Given that for the last 10 years or whatever it might have been, people have had access to accreditation reports. I don't know too many families that come in with the report and go, "Hey, I saw this, I want to know about it." I'll be curious to see, is there going to be some marketing around the star ratings? Is it just going to be something that we do? That'll be something that'll be really interesting. From the QFR side of things, I think one of the challenges that we've all had with some conversations we have with the department is around the consistency of data, as in some of the figures that we're operating on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes the department is saying, well, that's not the numbers that we're seeing. At least having the common QFR will hopefully help drive some of that and drive the discussions around where the industry's at. The transitioning out of 4B, I like Matt, I take that as an opportunity. And that's probably the big positive that's come out of all of it. So yeah, we're transitioning out of that and looking at different ways, again, using allied health differently, those type of things, which is really good. And that whole admission process, still reviewing that. And I think we'll be doing that for the next 6 months until we really work out what works best in our organisation. But again, you've still got that challenge around managing the ramping the staffing numbers up for your minutes, but also maintaining that viability with the funding that we're at the moment. So it's that real balancing act around understanding the data, understanding where we're at in terms of what, like you said, the one-off payments, yes, they help, and they weren't budgeted for, so it's a nice little kicker, but we do have to look at how do we manage those numbers as we continue to try and ramp up to get to the minutes next year. And also the 24/7 RN, some of our sites have 24/7, other ones don't. So we're still working out the best balance around that. And as I said earlier, the workforce shortages, whilst you may have them, it's do you have the backup staff if they get sick or whatever it might be. So I think there's some real challenges around that. But change is the new normal, and we've just got to stick with it and accept that this is the new normal, and we're going to continue to have to put up with this and find ways to operate in a different environment. Yeah,
like the industry always does, doesn't it? The thing about 4B, somebody also mentioned, several people mentioned to me over the last couple of weeks, that the really exciting thing about thinking differently, you mentioned this too about allied health, is it's not just mobility, falls prevention, that they're the obvious places, but a lot of people are looking really hard at speech and cognition and depression and lots, a really broad, lots of issues, and really the opportunity to really apply that in a really person-centered way, which obviously is the direction that everybody's going in. So some real opportunity to highlight some allied health specializations in areas that have probably been significantly underdone. Erin.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Look, Anglican Care, similar to all the other panelists, we have certainly been looking at our systems, trying to streamline where our data comes from and that type of thing. So that we don't go over the same things again, I suppose some of the more specific things that we've been looking at in Anglican Care is focusing on the model of care that we want to provide our consumers, our service philosophy. So what does that look like? Who are our carers? What jobs are they doing? How can we ensure that that fits into our care minutes, that type of thing? We've also been focusing on educating our frontline staff. So there's been a bit of a shift in the type of documentation that we are encouraging them to do. Previously, we probably encouraged on exception type of documentation, where now we're really looking at what's that routine type of care that they need. And certainly in addition to the exception, because that helps us know when we need to trigger a change or a reassessment. We really want to reflect those times of the heaviest burden of care. So we all know our consumers who can walk really well in the middle of the day, but when they need help out of bed in the middle of the night, they need 2 carers. So we really want to reflect those heaviest times where that burden is the heaviest, so that we can match those resources, or we can have those resources required during those times matched by our care minutes, which are reflected in our classes. Capturing the different types of behaviours that are included in the Brewer assessment, which potentially weren't covered all that well under ACFI. So that's a new thought process for our staff. So just making sure that they're really aware of what behaviours they do need to capture in their documentation, as opposed to just focusing on those ACFI ones, which has always been a given for them. And then I think socialising that idea that we actually might want to reduce a person's class on purpose. So, we know that our classes are matched to care minutes. And so socialising that idea, we're all working in the same labour workforce. We might actually want to reduce a person's care in order to manage our roster a lot better. Really redefining our focus, trying to work smarter, not harder. So really, before we pushed for the highest ACFI all the time, the entire industry did. That was what we did. Now we're trying to really focus on that more acute, more frequent review and validation of those consumers and capturing those changes really well. And knowing that we have 28 days to request a reconsideration if we disagree with the outcome of a class assessment from a shadow assessor. So making sure that when our shadow assessors have come in, or when our assessors have come in and made a class recommendation, if we don't agree with it, making sure that we are in that 28-day time frame to request a reclassification, so that it will go back to the time when the original class was put in. Probably another example of working smarter, not harder, is if you think about a class 8 and a class 9, both of those classes incur the same funding amount, but the care minute is different. So 200 care minutes of care staff, but under a class 8, 38 minutes of RN time and 44 minutes of RN time under a class 9. So we've got our customer relationship team who are looking at our residents and consumers who are coming through, and asking them to do assessments on what they believe the class to be, so that we can make strategic decisions about the type of classes that we're after for each of our different homes. We've also had our customer relationship team liaising with our local social workers and hospitals. We know that for a class 1 that needs to be assessed prior to entry to care. So having our customer relationship team making really firm connections with those people, sending them the form so that they're familiar with it, and that we can get all of that documentation through to us at the time of admission, so that we're entitled to that payment. And then I've seen in the comment there are a lot of questions around our 4B, and I, like the other panelists, we've been focusing on innovation in that space, which is such a lovely place to be. We really have been liaising with our consumers on their goals, not just focusing on physiotherapy if that's not a part of their goals. It might be dietitian, it might be speech therapy. It could be a multitude of the wonderful allied health professionals we do have working in our organisation, and ensuring that we focus on the goals that they want. We have continued with our pain management with a very small group of residents who have stated that they do still want that, and that's part of their goals, but majority of them have moved to group exercise classes or individual exercise classes. And again, that's based on their preference. So they're really the things that we've been focusing on, and we'll continue to look at as we move further into the changes that will come about in the next 12 to 18 months.
All right, thanks, Erin. We might just quickly see if we can flip to the questions in the chat and just see if there's any, Petra, is there any big questions that have come through there consistently that we might want to quickly respond to?
I think they're generally covered. One question around, there's a bit of conversation happening around the benefits of respite comparatively to permanent admissions. Anyone want to speak now that we've also, I guess, lost that incentive payment? Maybe.
For respite days, yeah.
I think there's still a real inherent incentive in offering respite as a try before you buy solution, and that it benefits the consumer obviously, but the provider as well gets a view of what that would equate to as a permanent resident. And so there is still that, yeah, very inherent incentive, not to mention the fact that respite subsidy rates are higher than they were under ACFI, and even more significant is that they now attract accommodation supplement. So the funding for respite bed days is significantly higher, and we still do not lose that inherent incentive of try before you buy, or and that works in both ways, as I said.
Yeah, the expectation also that it's a much faster process now. There's not this 28-day sort of process. There's the idea that as soon as they're entered into the facility, an assessor can turn up in a relatively short period of time, and the expectation is there's care plans and information and other information in place. So there's a real urgency to get that documentation stuff started. So like you said, Tyler, to get a window of time where you can have a good look at the resident before you turn them permanent can certainly give you a head start on getting that kind of documentation up to scratch, so that it's all about accuracy. You get the right classification.
Yeah, and we've had a couple questions on MIRIS metrics and the accuracy of the data in that. Maybe if you want to just let everyone know kind of what's happening on Monday and what that process will be.
Yeah, absolutely. So big news there is the new version of metrics will go live on Monday. So anyone that has access to metrics today will be able to log in to the new version on Monday. I guess with regard to accuracy of data, everyone has been struggling with inconsistencies or issues resulting from the payment system changeover in Services Australia. And so, yeah, we've been working very hard to ensure the accuracy of data and all systemic issues that we're aware of have been resolved. So I suppose anything that arises now would be those anomalies that are specific to a resident and really need to be escalated to Services Australia to be resolved. And I did notice in the comments that there is some real challenge around identifying those residents who've been in care for a long time. They had a paid ACFI all the way up until the end of September, and they still don't have an AN-ACC, and you can't go and request a reclassification because the My Aged Care portal doesn't know about them. And so we have this group of residents that only exist in Medicare, and they don't exist in My Aged Care, and they need an AN-ACC assessment. And so, you know, if we're looking at a average daily subsidy of $220 for a resident, you know, that's around $6,000 a month that you're missing, and that obviously aggregates quite quickly. So yeah, if you're at all concerned about those groups of residents being able to identify who they might be, please reach out, and we'll compile a list for you that you can take back to My Aged Care and let them know that they need to develop a record for this person and get them assessed for AN-ACC.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. And we are very, very excited for the upgraded version of metrics for AN-ACC, and anyone who is struggling with data, as Tyler said, please speak to us, because we think we've got the system that will help you with that, and certainly would like you to take a look at it. We also offer this service just on the screen at the moment. There's a lot of work to do with getting your AN-ACC classifications accurate, and we can help you with that. We've been helping a lot of people with that, and what we leave behind is also you know, some pretty well-trained staff so that they can become their own assessors in your organization themselves. So please think about that. And finally, the next webinar. So this is a long series. We really appreciate all of you supporting us and coming along to this free series. The next one, we're going to have a look at star ratings. Will be hot by then, we think. They'll be right on our doorstep. And before we head into the holiday break, we're going to talk about more detail about you know, what's happening with star ratings and QFRs, but also we're going to have a look at those new quality indicators and new standards in some more detail. What can you expect? So all of these things, funding and quality and rostering and care minutes, and they all interconnect these days. And that's a really important topic of discussion before we head into the break. What's going to hit us next year? So more detail on that in the next webinar. Please leave any comments on what else you'd like to hear from us about, or any feedback you have. Thanks so much to Matt, and to Justin and to Aaron for stepping up and using some of their time to give back to the industry. Really appreciate that, and all of your comments. Very, very much appreciated. And to all of you who have stayed on the line, thank you so much for supporting these webinars, and have a great day, and we'll see you next time.